Published in 2014, Revival is a horror novel by Stephen King that features themes like loss of faith, charlatan multimillionaire ministers, and questions of life after death. The book currently sits at a rating of 3.8 stars out of 5 on Goodreads, based on over 123,000 ratings. According to some Stephen King fans, Revival is considered one of King's most frightening novels, and the ending of this story seems to be either loved or hated. American religiosity is the central theme of this story, and readers who grew up in American Protestant churches will find some of these religious ideas and settings very familiar. As far as media adaptations go, Mike Flanagan was attached to a project to bring the story to film back in 2020, but since then the project has been scrapped due to budgetary issues. Like so many Stephen King novels, the story is originally set in a small town in Maine, where the protagonist of the novel, a young boy named Jamie, first meets a charismatic Methodist minister named Charles Jacobs, who studies electricity in his spare time. But tragedy strikes the Jacobs family, and Charles publicly renounces his faith to his church congregation and leaves town, but not before having a positive influence on Jamie, who grows up and becomes an accomplished guitarist. The novel follows Jamie's life into his adult years, during which he becomes a heroin addict, a sober success story, and finally a critic of Charles's public life. After the death of his wife, Charles becomes a traveling faith healer, and he utilizes this power that he calls secret electricity to help alleviate the physical suffering of his followers. Now, King has obviously modeled this incarnation of Charles after the uber-wealthy faith healers that are often seen on television well after midnight, where viewers are asked to send in their hard-earned money in exchange for God's blessing. Coincidentally, this same group of men is often associated with greed, spiritual exploitation, and sexual indiscretion, factors that highlight the hypocrisy that often plague high-profile ministers who really seem to enjoy the limelight. Stephen King's work constantly highlights portions of American faith, and in this case, his critiques are well-deserved. One need only look at the lives of ministers like Kenneth Copeland, Jim Bakker, Ted Haggard, Oral Roberts, Jimmy Swaggart, Peter Popoff, and many other high-profile celebrity ministers to suspect that Stephen King's version of Charles' cynical healing events may hide more sinister motives. Jamie confronts Charles, who insists that the healings are real, but he downplays the terrible side effects that are plaguing a minority of his followers, such as suicide and self-harm. And in fact, Charles confesses to Jamie that he is testing this secret electricity in order to find the afterlife and discover the fate of his dead wife and child. Now, at this point, Stephen King's work in this story, Revival, draws very clear inspiration from two classic horror sources. The first is Mary Shelley's 1818 Frankenstein and Arthur Macon's 1894 cosmic horror work called The Great God Pan. Both of these works are old, and they deal with unsettling questions about the true nature of life and death, and King's homage to both of those stories and their influence seeks to modernize those themes. He's incorporating those themes into a world which is postmodern and full of modern technology. Although, unfortunately, the book really suffers from King's stereotypical tendency to tell a story with too many non-essential details. During the climax of the book, Charles convinces Jamie to help him harness this electricity in the form of a lightning storm, with the goal to reviving a dead woman whose body then becomes a portal through which the afterlife can be seen. Much to the horror of our characters, the afterlife that they see, that they are able to perceive in some way through this conduit is revealed to be this desiccated wasteland in which gargantuan ant creatures torture every human being that dies, all the while dominated by an even more dominant gargantuan female creature called Mother, who begins to emerge from the dead woman's mouth. Jamie survives the encounter, and he spends the rest of his life musing on the horror that he knows awaits him upon his own death. Revival's lore appears to stand alone, although one could make the case that the Mother figure, the monster at the climax of the story, is somehow related to other monsters in the works of Stephen King's books, most notably the cosmic creature guised as Pennywise the Clown from his very famous book, It. Revival is one of the bleakest conclusions, and the cosmic horror creates a lingering dread that follows the reader long after the book is finished. But unfortunately, the work suffers from both too much and not enough character work. Readers know too much of Jamie's inner thoughts, which, in my opinion, leaves little room for them to identify with or see themselves in his character. The lore of the book is fascinating and dreadful, but the hundreds of pages between the relevant events diminish the fear. In conclusion, Stephen King's Revival is decent enough, although readers may actually get far more satisfying payoffs from the original cosmic horror works of Machen and H.P. Lovecraft. For this reason, I give Revival 2 out of 5 stars.